Hi everybody, welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm Tina Howard, and you know how we have gotten into this history thing lately, at least I have. Today I have a guest who is really interesting because he has been studying history in the area. And my guest today is Aubrey Sims. Welcome, Aubrey.
Thank you.
And if Aubrey's name is familiar, it's because he was born in Bowersville, right?
That's correct.
And currently lives in Royston.
That's right.
Yeah. And you may know Aubrey's name. If you didn't know him growing up, you may know his name because he runs what's turned out to be a really popular Facebook page called Bits of History. And that's how I became aware of you, because somebody posted or shared something on Bits of History. And it's fascinating. So I thank you for being here today. And we're going to go over some of the things that you're interested in and some of the local history. And it's just going to be a great show. So welcome. Great.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. So I always start with the person. So did you actually grow up in Bowersville?
I did. I grew up there until I was about 16 years old. Then I moved from Bowersville. And I went to Cobb County, graduated from school there, and then moved back to Bowersville until I was about 20. And then now I live in Royston.
Okay.
So, you know, I guess you could say I spent most of my youngest life, I guess you would say, in Bowersville.
Yeah. And what were you like as a kid? And give us a snapshot of you at 10 or 12.
I loved to ride my bicycle. That was my favorite thing. And I had several friends. And growing up in the time that I did, you know, everybody knew everybody. So we went.
That's nice.
We went everywhere. Went in everybody's yard. Nobody cared. But we rode our bicycles everywhere. Played on the creek.
Sounds like a carefree childhood.
Pretty much.
Pretty ideal.
I guess I had a few problems, but it was a good place to grow up.
That's great. And tell me about your line of work. What do? You don't do history. You're not a history professor.
No, not hardly.
You have a very interesting career.
I retired about a few years back. I retired about 6 years ago. I took an early retirement. I retired as an engineer. I worked at Carrier in Athens. So I've done that for, you know, quite a few years.
Okay.
So I took an early retirement.
Okay, good. And so taking an early retirement means you can pursue a number of hobbies, probably.
Exactly.
Good. Tell me about some of your hobbies, because I am blown away by things that you list as hobbies.
Well, myself, it's like I've always took the idea that's like I don't really care for TV much, watching a lot of TV.
Well, there's silly. There's except for our show.
There's a few shows. Yeah, there's a few. So mainly what I do is like I take interest. I've done this my whole life. It's like, you know, I take things that I'm interested in, and I may spend 5 years on it, 3 years, 10 years, until I've learned all I want to know. Then, you know, then I move on. So that's why I just entertain myself learning things.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Okay, so I guess one of my odd hobbies is plant-based medicines. I've studied that for probably 10 years, and a lot of plants and amino acids, and a lot of things can be used for medicines. I won't list here, but a lot of things can be used for medicines that most people have no idea.
Interesting. And so you're sort of self-taught with that. And you mentioned earlier that you have a microscope.
I do, and it's a little bit of microbiology, study, you know, things about bacteria, like, you know, how long does it take to kill bacteria with alcohol? It's not. It's a whole lot longer than you think.
Yeah, because the hand sanitizers are everywhere now. So we think we rub that on our hands really good and boom, no more bacteria.
No, I won't repeat everything here, but it's not like that at all. It's not like most people think.
It takes some time for things
to... It takes 2 hours and 10 minutes to kill everything under...
Meanwhile, you touch everything else.
It takes 2 hours, and that's if the alcohol don't evaporate.
Oh,
I've done the test probably 6, 7 times, and it's like... same results every time. 2 hours, 10 minutes.
It's amazing what you can do when you're not just sitting on the sofa, right?
Right.
That's great. But hand washing is still the number one, right?
Hand washing is probably the better thing that what I've seen.
Is the better thing. So yeah, okay. Well, that's interesting. That's a cool hobby. And what other hobbies?
I've studied alternative energy.
Like wind and solar, or?
No, these are things that are basically most people would not have heard of. I have a guy I've studied his work pretty extensively, a guy named Nikola Tesla. And you don't even read about him in the history books much, but I've studied a lot of his work. And there are alternative ways to create electricity, even to transmit electricity without wires across the air. I mean, I've done that. I've got videos doing that. So you can you can transmit electricity without wires. So I don't want to go into a lot of detail with that, but yeah. So you have to learn electronics as well to go along with that. Yeah. So that's one of the things, you got to learn electronics too.
I've already got 2 more shows planned in my head now, just talking about your hobbies. So those are interesting hobbies. You also you're a photographer as well.
I used to do wedding photography and a lot of editing. I used to, for a period of time, probably 7 or 8 years, I built computers, and I still repair computers now. For my friends mainly. I don't do it for a living.
Not for a business.
No, and I run a recording studio.
Music?
Music, I record, produce music, produce records I've been doing this 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah,
cool.
I've been doing this 20 years.
3 shows in the future.
So I record people from all over, from far away as Kentucky, South Georgia, all over. Right now I'm recording a group from down in Calhoun Falls. So I do full-blown production music and basically produce CDs, and so I've been doing that, like I was saying, in 20 years.
That's amazing. And the studio is in the Royston area.
It is. It's called Inspiration Recording Studio, and it's in Royston.
Cool. That's interesting. So you wear a lot of hats, my friend.
Yeah, kind of, but like I was saying again, it's like I don't do any of them full time.
Yeah, just for fun.
Just for fun.
And so you started this Facebook page called Bits of History, and you started that just a few months ago. Mm-hmm. And I became aware of it when somebody shared it, and I joined it to follow it. And you post quite often on there some really interesting things about local history. How long have you been a history buff?
I've been studying history for about 6 years now, and so it's like that's just another hobby, I guess you would say.
When you say history, you mentioned Tesla and history of Tesla. Are you interested in world history?
No, some world history, but mainly I study like local history here. So it's like the whole site, Bits of History, is about like Hart County, Franklin County, all the towns that are around, like Royston, Bowersville, all the local towns right in this area. So I don't go too far. I have a few stories that's a little bit out of there, but most of them are, in this area pretty much.
And you and I agree on one thing, and that is we have such a rich history in this area.
That's true.
Very rich history, and a lot of it surprises me when I learn new things. How did you get interested in the local history? Was it a family member or?
Here's what happened. When I was 10 years old, my step-grandfather told me something one time that I never forgot. And this was like a one-way conversation, and I've always regretted I didn't ask him more about it. But he said this, when I was living in Bowersville, he said, Bowersville used to be the biggest town around, and it was the center of commerce around. And if you had like cotton for sale or anything, you had to go to Bowersville to put it on the train.
Wow.
And it's like at some time Bowersville was it's like you couldn't even walk the streets. There were so many people. Everything you wanted was in Bowersville. Dentist, you name it. Anything you wanted was there. And being 10 years old, I'm thinking, okay, in my short lifetime, I've never seen anything here.
Right. There's not much in Bowersville.
There's nothing. It's like, I'm thinking, does he really know what he's talking about? It's like, I didn't say that, but I thought that.
But
I didn't ask any questions, and I regret that I didn't.
Yeah.
But he said that, we had a big fire in Bowersville, and it burned up about half the town, and we had the biggest hotel here, and all the traveling salesmen and everybody who, they would go to Toccoa, they would go to Elberton, but everybody wanted to end up back in Bowersville because they had the best food and they had the best hotel.
Wow.
So they had a fire, and it burned up about half the town at one time.
When was the fire?
I believe it was seemed like 1888.
Oh, it was way back.
Yeah, it was way back.
Okay.
It wasn't long after the town first was incorporated.
Okay.
So that happened, and he told me this, and it's like, okay. I never forgot. I never asked him anything. It was a one-sided conversation. Probably lasted 30 seconds of all. But I never forgot it. And I said, you know, as I got older, I said, you know, one day I'm going to learn the history of Iversville.
Yeah.
And so when I retired, it's like, I think this is a good opportunity. So I started studying it, and come to find out, every word he said, it's just like he wrote it down.
Oh, wow.
And the books I read is like perfect description.
Wow.
It's like, I couldn't believe it. It's like he was right on.
He knew.
So that's what got me interested in studying history.
That's great. Isn't that funny, that one little conversation
One
with
little
your
conversation, that's all it was.
Triggered this much later in time, but triggered all this interest in history. So your page on Facebook, Bits of History, you've posted some really interesting things about things like the ferries. We don't think about when, before, you know, we have a river as a state line, Savannah River. So to cross that, you didn't just cross it on a road.
No.
There were ferries.
Not in the early days.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a place.
That was quite a barrier.
A place here called around Hartwell that most people don't seem to know about, called Brown's Ferry.
Okay.
There was other ferries up and down the Savannah. There was no Hartwell Lake at the time.
Right.
Okay, but there were other ferries. But Brown's Ferry was very infamous in the history that happened there.
Okay.
So to kind of get an idea of where Brown's Ferry was at, if you're standing on the top of Hartwell Dam and you're looking out onto the reservoir, about 2 miles up, right in the middle right there, that's where Brown's Ferry was at. It's totally covered in water.
So is there a road that would have...
The Savannah, it was right on the Savannah River.
Okay.
Okay. And there was a road, and I'll explain that in a minute.
Okay.
So basically the ferry, well, let me back up just a little bit before then. That same area in 1790, there was a guy named Thomas Shockley, and he built the first ferry there. And if you don't know what a ferry is, it's like a flat boat. And if you got to get something across the river, you don't want to swim, it's just you roll it up on there, and there's a steel cable that goes from one side of the bank to the other, and it attaches to the ferry to keep it from washing down with the current. So this thing is pulled along by hand, so they could like put a wagon, cattle, bale cotton, anything you wanted, and take it across to the other side.
Okay.
Okay, so there was no bridges in those days. So Shockley's Ferry and then a couple other ferries on down were the only way to get across that river unless you want to swim.
Do you think Brown's Ferry was one of the major ones?
It was one of the major ones. So later on, Shockley's Ferry was there at 1790, so he ran that for quite a while. And then Brown's Ferry was there. So there was a guy named William Penn Brown. And William Penn Brown bought the ferry, so it's the same location. Okay. He ran the ferry there for a number of years as well. Okay. So later on, they built something called Alford's Bridge there. It's an Alford Steel Bridge.
And Alford's was privately funded, right?
It was privately owned, so it was. Each way, even with the ferries, you had to pay to go across them. So Alford Bridge was the same way.
A toll bridge.
It was a toll bridge. And so Alford built that bridge there and paid for it with his own money, so you had to pay to go across it.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. So basically, that was built in like 1917.
Okay.
I got a photo for you there so you can take a look at it. Okay, and you were asking about a road a minute ago. So old Highway 29, a lot of people ride down that road and have no idea. It's like, well, what's this doing here? That's where it went across Alford's Bridge.
Oh, that was a major crossing.
That was the highway. So it's like when you went to South Carolina, that's the way you went.
That's the way you went. Okay.
You went down the old 29 highway. If you go there and look straight across, you see the other side. You can kind of see where the road was, you know.
Interesting.
Okay, so
and that's where those ferries were.
That's where the two ferries were. Okay, so a side note, there was another ferry right down the road, about 8 miles from there, and you've probably been over it before. It's the Smith-McGee Bridge.
Okay.
Okay, so Alford, He built Alfred's steel bridge, and then later on he bought the bridge, Smith McGee Bridge as well. Oh. So he ran them both. So if you're going to go to Anderson, it's like you're going to pay
Mr. Alford.
You're going to pay me there, and you're going to pay me coming back. So he had it all.
Okay.
So later on, the state of Georgia and the state of South Carolina said, we'll take this, and like, okay, let's split this up. We got to do something here. Yeah. So they bought the bridges and took the toll off of it. So they made just a regular bridge out of it.
Okay.
Then in the same area, in 1940, the Louis Morris Bridge was built there. So
never heard of that.
Yeah. You cross it, one version of it every day, and I'll tell you that in just a minute.
Really?
Yeah,
okay.
if you go to Anderson.
Okay.
So the Louis Morris Bridge, and most people in Hartwell don't know who he is, and everybody should know who Louis Morris is.
Okay.
He did more for Hartwell than any person alive or has ever lived, I would say. But Louis Morris, they built a bridge all the way across there, and like I said again, Highway 29 went across there. So if you were going there, Highway 29 and the Bankhead Highway, what it was called, and the Louis Morris Bridge at the same location. Okay, but a few years later, the Hartwell Dam was going to be built in 1958. And so they said, okay, we got a problem here. So the area that was first Shockley's Ferry, and then later Brown's Ferry, and then later Alfred Steel Bridge, and then later the Louis Morris Bridge, all that area was going to be underwater, and Highway 29. So you couldn't build a bridge all the way across there, it's too far. So they said, let's reroute 29. So they rerouted 29 from where it was once at over the bridge, and they took it right in front of Hartwell Dam. So they moved the Louis Morris Bridge from the Browns Ferry location, and they moved it about 2 miles south, right in front of the dam, and then they rerouted Highway 29. So as I was saying a minute ago, you cross the Louis Morris Bridge. That the new bridge where they moved it over is still called Louis Morris Bridge. So that's the bridge.
There's a plaque on it, but I've never.
That's what it says.
Who's going to stop? Okay, well there you go. Okay.
There's actually 2 plaques on it. There's one on the top, one on the bottom. One of them says this is from the Louis Morris Bridge that used to be at Brown's Ferry.
Okay.
And then the other one says this bridge was moved here in 1958.
Wow.
So there's 2. Those were one from that location, and they brought both plaques.
And who was Louis Morris? Was he a mayor, or was he a
Louis Morris? He was very important. He built. He was the editor of the Hartwell Sun.
Oh.
He probably did more to promote the city of Hartwell than any person.
Okay.
He worked very tirelessly here.
Okay.
He built the WKLY radio station. Him and his son-in-law built it.
Okay.
He was pretty much responsible for getting the Hartwell Dam built. Wow. So if you go to the Hartwell Dam right in front of the dam, you'll see a plaque there, and it has Louis Morris's name on it as one of the main people who got that dam in here. Even a couple of weeks before he died, he had been up in Washington and trying to get the funding, trying to get okay. So he worked on this thing like, if you go back and read the old Hartwell Suns for 10 or 15 years trying to get this dam built and the reservoir. So he was pretty much the most had more to do with that in promoting this area.
Wow.
So he worked very tirelessly, and it's a shame that very few people know who he was.
Yeah, I'm glad I know who he is now. I felt like I knew his name, but I didn't really understand what he had done. And so Lake Hartwell was backed up between 58 and 61, is that right?
Yeah.
And it covered a lot. It covered the roads, it covered everything.
Yep. There's a lot of places on up the stream too that are covered up that there's a town called Andersonville. It's on north of there. There's a town called a place called Hatton's Ford. There was a duel that happened there in the 1800s, and one of the guys is called a Perry Bynum duel, and a little lake out here in the middle of the river. It was the Savannah River, not the lake at the time. There was a duel happened there, and one of the guys
with pistols, or
with pistols. It was an argument between the North and the South.
Oh,
basically, one of the guys was he was a newspaper editor over in Anderson, and there's a whole long story about it. But basically, they got in an argument about politics. Is pretty much it. So one challenged the other to a duel, and so when they had the duel, he got killed right there on that island, right up north of him.
The editor did? Or
No, the other guy did.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, he's buried over in Rock Church over in South Carolina.
Wow.
And the other guy went on to become governor of South Carolina in his later years. If you want to hear the entire story, go to Bits of History, and you can go on there, and it's like satire.
Yeah, you better find a Sunday afternoon when it's raining, because there's a lot you can scroll.
Yeah, there's quite a bit there.
Interesting. But yeah, I remember seeing that story a while back. That's fascinating. And going back to Browns Ferry, there was an event after the Civil War there that was written up in the Baker history book, and you mentioned that on the book.
It is very important that most people don't know this history. That a very important event happened there. There were 3 Civil War soldiers that were killed there, murdered there at Browns Ferry. And
after the war, or
after the war?
After
so the war ended like March of 1865, and this happened in November. So it's like 6 months, after. 6 months after the war. Okay, so here was really what happened. What caused this whole event?
Okay.
There was a man named Crawford Keyes, and he owned a barge of cotton. And this barge of cotton was stationed at Browns Ferry.
I'm guessing he was moving it so he could sell it.
Well, here was really the big argument. After the war, Hart County, all this whole area, they had soldiers here. And so the North said, that cotton is ours.
Right.
We're going to take it because it was part of rebel cause, and so it was like, oh, we can take it. Well, during that day, cotton had because of all the infrastructure in the South had been destroyed. So all the cotton, everything had been destroyed, and so cotton was at the peak price. I mean, it was like a fortune.
It was very valuable at that point. Yeah.
Okay, so Mr. Keyes said, well, hold on, not so fast here. I'm a civilian.
I grew it, and it's mine.
It's like you have no right to take a civilian's property.
Oh.
Because
he wasn't even a soldier.
He tried to sell it, to the rebels, but he never got paid for it. So he said, "It's still mine." The North said, "No, we're going to take this cotton.
And confiscate it.
We're going to confiscate it."
Huh.
So the North had a garrison of soldiers in Anderson, South Carolina. So they sent 3 young soldiers over there and said, guard this cotton to make sure nobody floats it down to Augusta or Macon and steals it.
Okay.
So the very first day they got there, they got the sleeping bags out, and they were asleep, and a group of people rode up, I think probably on horses, and they murdered all 3 guys.
Wow.
And they threw some of their weapons in the Savannah River. And I've got a photo of that where a few days later those weapons were found, and they're still around.
Wow.
Yeah. So they were retrieved. So what happened was that...
now, who found those? How would you find them? You just see them floating?
They were out, I think, looking for a fish basket or something, and just happened to actually just step on them. Just by accident, and just stepped on them and pulled it out like, here's a gun. And
was it found at the time or many years later?
A few days later.
Oh, right.
Yeah, right then. So it was still good. It was not rusty.
Evidence.
It was, well, they used it as evidence, I think, but basically they kept them, the family kept them. There's, I believe, let me see my notes here.
This is Deputy Kerry Carter.
Kerry Carter, yeah, they kept them.
His dad.
And his dad.
Okay.
There's a newspaper article I've got that I'll show you here.
Okay.
And
so what happened after they found the weapons in the river?
What happened was that the sympathy of you know, it's like people, because these were Northern soldiers, it's like, you know, who cares? They killed them. Well,
yeah, they were probably mad.
The word came out that it's like there was 4 people who were indicted for the murders.
Was it because they recognized the weapons? Oh, that's old, you know.
Well, actually, Billy what happened was this. One of them was Crawford Keyes, and it was the guy who owned the cotton, and 3 of his friends.
Oh.
They were all indicted. And how that came about was in the ferries, you usually had an old shack there, and they ran these ferries like 24 hours a day. So you would have somebody work a shift, and they would stay there. And then they would, you know, change shifts. Well, when these guys were killed, the ferryman was Mr. Brown, the owner of it, and he saw everything from, I guess they probably didn't know he was there, but he saw everything happen. So he ended up being the star witness. He wouldn't lie. Even though he's from the South, he said, no, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to tell the truth about what I saw. So
that was bold.
It turned everybody in the whole community. He was
against him?
Blackballed, I guess you would say. So he was treated very badly for a lot of years because of his stand. It's like, no, I'm not. I've got to tell the truth.
Yeah.
So the sentiment, the whole public sentiment was with the murderers. They didn't care if they were murderers or not. They were Southern, you know.
They,
and so,
they felt like they were in the right.
Yeah, because of the they were Northerners.
Wow.
Okay, so they had a military trial, it lasted about 3 months, and they even just built up and had a congressional hearing. It got so bad, I mean, it's like news all over the country. And so they were all convicted of murder and sentenced to hang. So they spent some time in jail, but before the sentence was ever carried out, then they were, it was commuted to life in prison. And then later on, President Andrew Johnson, he basically pardoned all 4 of them.
Wow.
And so none of them ever served any time for it. Wow. I mean, other than what the time none of them were hung.
Wow. Now that's not the only big news. You told me about there was a dispute over where the center of the world was supposed to be.
Well,
the Native Americans.
The city of Hartwell.
Oh, the city of Hartwell.
The city of Hartwell.
Now the Native Americans said the center of the world was in one place.
Yeah.
And that is now.
Well, here's really the whole story.
Okay.
When Hart County was made, it was taken from land from Elbert County, Madison County, and basically, and they said, okay, we're going to make a new county. So that was in 1853, December 7th.
Okay.
Well, by a few months later, the justices of the inferior court had already hired people and done a survey and said, okay, we need the county seat. We need to have a town.
County seat, right?
You know, so Hartwell is a planned town. It was not just something. Most people kind of get the idea. Hartwell just kind of sprung up and just happened.
Because of a trade route.
Yeah,
or a
it was like no,
it was planned.
It was a planned town from the beginning. So they said, here's where we want the town. Well, there was another group of people in Hart County that said, not so fast.
Now, they wanted it where? At the center?
At the center of the world.
Because of the historical significance with the Native Americans, or because
I don't really understand why they wanted it. I think it was maybe because closer to their location. They wanted the town.
For them.
It was probably a little bit.
And this is before the square became, or?
No, this is. I have a picture of the center of the world.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with it. You know where Fabritec's at?
Fabritec's.
Yeah, it's right there.
There's a little monument.
So nothing had been built yet.
Okay.
Okay, so they were going to move. One group said we want the town built at the center of the world, and others said we want it at the place where the survey said, which is where it's at right now.
Okay.
So 2 lawyers were hired, Thomas Cobb, and they were brothers.
Okay.
Thomas Cobb.
The 2 attorneys were brothers?
They were brothers. Yeah, they were brothers. And they were hired to represent each side. And when they first called the meeting, Esquire Joe Bowers was called to chairman the meeting. And then this big group and then they file suit.
Okay.
Esquire is a person who is, back in those days, was like a person who was allowed to practice law.
Okay.
So that's what, it was not a, it was just a title,
okay.
like a lawyer or whatever.
Okay.
So Joe Bowers, he was the chairman and oversaw this whole process. So they got the two lawyers. Thomas Cobb represented the place, the Center of the World, the group that wanted the Center of the World, and his brother, Howell Cobb, represented the other side, who wanted it where it's at now. Mm-hmm. So after all the legal battle and all the dust settled and all the arguments and everything, you know who won, where it's obvious. So Howell Cobb won. Okay. So in gratitude to Howell Cobb, the group said, we'd like to name Main Street Hartwell after you.
So it used to be Main Street?
Well, it was going to be the Main Street.
It was going to be Main Street.
It hadn't been built yet. Okay. There's nothing there yet.
Okay.
It's nothing but a hunting ground there.
Oh.
Nothing there. So when we build this city, we're going to name Main Street after you. And they kind of got in a dispute, and some said, well, you know what, they were going to name it Cobb Street. Well,
you can't do that because
the
other brother.
You don't know who won.
Right.
So they settled, and it's like, we'll name it Howell Street. So that's why Main Street in Hartwell is Howell Street.
Interesting.
Yeah.
After Howell Cobb.
After Howell Cobb.
Who prevailed in the lawsuit. That's so crazy. So you show some maps on your Bits of History page that I love old maps. I love maps to start with, but old maps in particular I love. And you've got you've got a map from it says from 1899 here.
Yeah. If they can put that up on the screen.
Of course, the lake wasn't here in 1899.
No.
And the area was mostly, I guess it was all farmland, wasn't it?
It was all farmland, yeah.
So
this map, if you take a look at it, you'll see quite a few towns, or I guess you would say communities there, that it's like, okay.
Here's one called Pay Up. Pay Up.
That's exactly right. So let me read a few of them off to you there. If you take a look at the map I've got for you there. So in Hart County, there was like Cooper and Ryle. It's like, have you ever heard of those?
No.
Okay.
Where do you live, Ryle?
Ryle. Or for instance, up around between Bowers and Livonia, there was Aquavia.
Aquavia?
Yeah, and there was Slate. Evidently, it looks like on the map to me that's kind of like right outside of Bowersville, between Bowersville and Livonia. Aquavia, some people argue that was Livonia. It's like, I don't think so, because it also has Livonia on that map too. There's Livonia and Aquavia, so I'm thinking it's like right before you got into Livonia.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And Amandaville, I wonder who Amanda was.
So you're looking at Pay Up, Buffalo, Alford.
I've heard of Alford Bridge, but I've also heard of Alford's district in the old
that was in the voting
census,
district.
Yeah.
Then you had
Is this Coldwater?
Yep.
Named after the creek, I guess.
Yeah. Franklin County, you had Salubrity, you had Garlandville, you had Aid, Henry.
AID?
Yeah. AID. Henry, Iron Rock, Ashland, Adolphus, and Katz. You ever heard of those? But I will say this, that Salubrity, I found there's a road called Salubrity Road, so I'm thinking there's probably still pieces of these communities, and some of these even had their own post offices.
And you know, Montevideo is not on here, and neither is Bull Snort. My two favorite names.
So in Elbert County,
Montevideo is on here.
Yeah, and in Elbert County you had Concordia, I believe is the way it's pronounced, or Webster Place, Criddle, Humeville, Rock Fence. You ever heard of those?
Never. Middleton? No, never. That's fascinating, because those are gone. And some of them sound like they might have been family names, and some of them sound like they might have been named after what was there, like Coldwater Creek might have been cold, or something like that.
So I think there's probably Cromer's. There's one on there, Cromer's, and it's like Cromer's Mill. It's probably... So some of those probably are maybe around in bits and pieces now, but the towns is like most of these names I've never heard of.
And iron, rock, and slate you think might be because of what was, been the natural resources that were there.
But all those towns were there in 1899 and owned them out, but I don't think any of them there today, or very few, or maybe just some remnants of it.
That is interesting. And you've gotten some history posts on Vanna, on how Vanna and some of the other areas, how they got their names, and a little history of those.
Vanna was interesting. Vanna was first called Friendship, and Vanna had a post office there, and there's a man named Ezra Bowers that was the postmaster, and he took notice to a young girl named Vanna Ballinger. She used to walk by, and I think he probably caught his eye. And so after a period of time, he named the post office Vanna Post Office. Well, later on, I guess people got the idea, well, if that's going to be Vanna Post Office, then I guess we need to name the town Vanna Town, too. So it kind of followed the name of the post office.
And did the girl Vanna stay there? Or
she lived there her entire life. She never got married. Yeah.
She never married the postmaster?
She never married. Oh, she was buried at Vanna United Methodist Church, the town that was named in her honor.
Wow.
And so she's buried right there.
That's crazy.
But she never got married. She stayed single her whole life, as far as I know.
You have named two Bowers that I guess you're going to get to that. I don't want to skip ahead of where you want to take us, but some of these names kind of keep popping up a little bit.
The Bowers are a very prominent family in the history of Hart County, and so there's a whole lot about the Bowers. And I'll talk about that.
I guess the Bowers are related to Bowersville, maybe, some of them?
Yes.
Okay. Well,
and Cannon.
And what?
Cannon as well.
Cannon?
Yeah. There's a whole story. I'll get to that in a few minutes.
Okay. Interesting. All right, what other towns do we need to know about?
Royston, a little bit for the people in Royston. Royston came about, the whole downtown area of Royston was bought $2 per acre. So there's 2 acres there. So the whole downtown area of Royston cost $4. It was bought by...
For the price of a Big Mac, you could buy a town.
So it was bought by a guy named W.A. Royston. He bought it there.
Okay, so Royston was his last name.
That was his last name. He bought that, and he built about where Mayberry Tire is at. Not exactly, but somewhere right around where Mayberry Tire is at. Okay. He built his house there. Not a huge house, but just just a nice house. Right down from that, about where Royston Drugstore is, he built a store there. And there was a row of trees between his house and the store, which would be like now where Highway 29 is at, right between here. And there was a well that I guess it was probably his personal well. And it exists, if you look at where Highway 29 and Highway 17 cross, the red light right there, which is right between the store and the house, his well is directly up under the red light.
Oh, wow.
So it's not there, it's covered up now, but it was directly under that red light.
So what would make somebody walk into an area and go, I think I'll buy a town. Here's $4. I'll build my house in a store. I guess because they could. Yeah.
Well, that don't sound like a lot of money, but keep in mind that Hartwell, when they built the town of Hartwell, it was purchased from a guy named James Vickery, I believe it was, and they paid $2 an acre for it as well, and they bought 100 acres for $200. So the whole town of Hartwell cost $200.
Wow. Wow.
So that was the going price for land. It sounds like nothing now, but it's like, it was a good bit of money in those days. Yeah. Also, as a side note, there was a hotel there in Royston called the Johnson Hotel. Okay. And it was located, it was a beautiful building. I've got a photo for you here. And it was a beautiful building. And every town, back in those days, people, I guess, don't tend to get that trains were the mode of transportation. No cars much. Either going to walk or a horse, or the train was the best way. So every town had a motel. I mean, everywhere you went, if you had a motel, I mean, a train depot, then somewhere really close to that, there was going to be a hotel. So that's the way it was there. Right in behind the depot was Johnson Hotel. It was a beautiful building. So I've got a picture of it. It's like most people look at this picture and say, hard to believe that anything like this ever existed in Royston, but it does. I mean, it
grand,
did.
Huh?
It was pretty nice. It was beautiful. Yeah.
Wow. Interesting.
Mayberry Tire, another building there, a little bit different subject. Mayberry Tire there in Royston was once a car dealership, and when you bought a model or a T model car, they came in. They were not totally assembled, so they didn't have the wheels on it. They came in boxed up in a box. They didn't drive it to you. They sent it to you on the train, like everything.
A shell of a car.
Yeah, and so
somebody had to put.
Somebody had to finish it up.
Wow. Didn't know that.
So that's the way. I've got a picture for you, and you can kind of see how they were boxed up. And so they had, I guess you would say this would be a finishing process at a dealer, but Mayberry Tire had, they did the final assembly. Okay. So if you look in Mayberry Tire in one of the racks there on the ceiling, there's still a track right there where they used to assemble these Model A's and Model T's.
Because they had to lift it up
they had to lift it up.
On.
Yeah.
And that had to be mechanical because
they had to pick it up, and then so the tracks are still there.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is, I didn't realize that building was that old. Mm-hmm. Interesting. And so in Hartwell, you know, centering back around Hartwell, give us some history on Hartwell.
All right. There's a few interesting things. I won't cover too many things, but maybe just a few things. First child that was born, Hartwell, you know, became a town in 1854.
So its first citizen was born.
First citizen, William Hartwell Cole, was born.
Nice.
And I have a picture of him, what I believe to be his tombstone. So he was born in 1854.
Okay, interesting.
And let's see, this is February 7th, 1835. You may have heard your great-great-grandmother talk about this. It was called Cold Saturday.
You know, none of my grandparents obviously weren't around, but they heard their grandparents talk about it.
They talked about Cold Saturday. And it was the coldest day. It was 15 below zero.
Anybody could remember.
Anybody, it's like, this is the coldest day.
So it was 15 below zero?
Yeah, in Hart County.
That just doesn't happen here.
Yeah, so it happened one day.
That caused all kinds of problems.
So this is probably talked about over 100 years.
Yeah.
And it was always referred to as, oh, it's cold Saturday, you know, which it never was, but they always refer to Cold Saturday. So some of the older people, my uncle had told me that, yeah, I've heard my grandmother or great-grandmother talk about Cold Saturday. So that was a common phrase then that hardly nobody now would really understand.
Know what it is.
Yeah.
Wow.
Then you had November 13th, 1839. It was called the day the stars fell.
What do you think that was, a meteor shower?
It was a meteor shower, and everybody said the world is coming to an end.
Well, I bet, because even when it's 15 below zero, you probably think the world's coming to an end.
It's like,
they probably rushed into the churches to beg forgiveness for whatever people had done.
Nobody had ever seen this meteor shower. It's like phenomenal, evidently. And nobody had ever seen anything of that magnitude, so they call it the day the stars fell.
Wow.
So that was November 13th, 1839. There was an event that happened in Bowersville called Who Struck Billy Patterson. And what that was about, there was a very wealthy man from Baltimore, Maryland. His name was Billy Patterson. He came to Bowersville. He had bought land, and he came to see about his land. I mean, he was so wealthy. They said he owned like blocks of buildings in Baltimore. He owned numbers of shipyards. So he was very wealthy, and so he was down checking out his land. And you know how it always kind of was before the war. There was always a northern and a southern argument thing going on about, well, we think it's should be like this. And
was this before the Civil War?
This is way back. It was way back, before the Civil War.
Okay.
but there was always this rift between the North and the South, and how we think it should be.
So they didn't like him because he was from the North.
There was always arguments between North and the South, and how we think it should be. And later on, finally ended up into the war. So he was up there checking on his property, and he got into an argument with somebody there. Somebody came up behind him and hit him in the head and knocked him out.
Oh.
So when he gets back up, he didn't see who it was, and he offered a huge reward, which was a fortune. In those days, it's like, I will give you, $1,000, I think it was. If somebody would who hit me, and nobody ever told him.
No?
Nobody ever told him. Nobody ever collected.
See, today people would be making it up.
He died.
They'd be turning in their neighbors to get that $1,000.
He died, still trying to find out who hit him in the head.
Oh my God!
It's like, so he lived for years after that. So this was, the event was called a world-renowned conundrum. That's what they called it.
Wow.
In those days.
Who struck Billy Patterson?
And everybody knew about this event, and it was like everybody talked about it for 100 years. And it's like, who struck Billy Patterson?
Gosh. Wow, that sounds like a soap opera.
Another sideline, there was a mill for making gunpowder. Over back at the center of the world.
Okay.
It was called, on the creek, it was called Powder Mill Branch. And they made gunpowder there to be used in the War of 1812.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting.
Gosh.
And one final thing about Hartwell. When the town of Hartwell was being laid out after the lawsuit had been won, and there was two guys that was part of all the whole planning who stayed the night in Madison, Georgia, and they thought, we really like this town. It's like it's real spacious. The streets are real wide, and so we like the feel of this town. So they went out and got them a tape measure that night and measured around the city square, the streets, and kind of like wrote it all down and come back and told the surveyors of Hartwell, make Hartwell like Madison. So the streets of Hartwell are modeled after the widths of Madison, Georgia.
Wow.
So if you look at, I've got a couple of pictures. If you look at the first picture here, if you first glance, you think you're looking at Hartwell like, no, that's not Hartwell, that's Madison.
Wow.
And then the second picture, you can kind of compare the width of the street. So it kind of looks a lot like it.
Broad streets in Hartwell. I've always liked that, appreciated that. That is interesting. And you got some other little communities in history here. Gold mine. Gold mine. Was there a gold mine in
There was a gold mine,
Okay.
and it's like that's how it really got its name.
Wow.
Okay, so here's kind of what happened. A little bit of a story. There was actually a gold mine found in Gold Mine. That land was originally owned by a guy named Andrew Brown.
Okay.
And I think the way he probably got it, he fought in the Revolutionary War. I've got a photo of his tombstone. He was a Revolutionary War soldier. So a lot of times if you fought in there in the Revolutionary War, they were awarded large tracts of land for their service. So he is buried, Andrew Brown is buried at Holly Springs Church over around Bowman.
Okay.
I got a couple of photos for you. And in the year of 1860, Otto Berg, he was from Baltimore, Maryland, he purchased
another Yankee.
Yeah, another one. Yeah, he bought this land from the son, not Andrew Brown. Andrew Brown had evidently passed it to his son, and his name was Mr. James Brown. He's also buried in Holly Springs Cemetery. Okay.
So Mr. Berg bought the land from James Brown.
Yeah, and he paid him, $5,291, and he bought 503 acres of land from him.
Wow.
Okay, but the deal was, I've read the contract, and they had a contract that said they knew the gold was there and it had been found there.
Oh, so that was after the gold had been discovered?
Yeah, it had been discovered. They knew for a fact it was there.
Oh.
So they brought in machinery, and part of the deal was that, part of the money went to the company, and part of it went to him. So this is right along to when the Civil War happened.
Okay.
So this is like in I believe it was 1860. I believe is when it happened. So they hadn't got too much. They had started mining a little gold, and the Civil War broke out, and I guess there was some contention, and maybe it didn't make as much money. I don't know what really the problem was, but I read the contract, and basically the company's supposed to do certain things, and they did do a lot of things, but maybe they didn't come through on all of it. And so they eventually, after just a short period of time, packed up and left because the Civil War started, and they didn't want to be here.
Oh.
So after a period of time, there was a man named Charles Seidel who worked there for them, as best as I can gather. And he, I think, maybe they owed him money for labor or something like that. Somehow he had some type of hold upon the land. So he sued, and after a number of years, they didn't come back. So he sued to get his money. So it went to auction, and he bought it. So he got to hold all the land.
So he bought it at auction price.
He bought it at auction price.
Wow. So how much, was there never that much gold coming out of there?
There's a vein of gold that goes all the way from there all the way to Dewey Rose. It's on the geology map, but it's like, I don't know why it's not been mined.
Wow.
But it's on the Georgia geology map.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so it's like, see people out tomorrow digging.
That's right. That's interesting.
Now they know where it's at.
So Gold Mine was named after
actual gold mine. Yes.
And there is a gold belt.
Yep, there is a gold belt. It goes all the way over to Dewey Rose.
Wow.
Yeah. And
that's interesting. Okay. And you mentioned the Bowers people. You were going to bring us back around to Bowers.
I will. Some of the founders that way back in the early days of Hart County, there's a man named Job Bowers, and he was very young. He was
Job?
Job.
J-O-B.
J-O-B-E. J-O-B.
Like the biblical guy. Job Bowers.
And he was a Welsh descent.
Okay.
Let's see, he was...
how do you ever find Hart County from Wales?
He was from Virginia.
Okay.
And he was born in Virginia in 1755.
Okay.
So for some reason he decided to come here.
Okay.
Okay. He later, from Virginia, he moved at the time. The area what we call Hart County was not Hart County. It was not there.
Yeah.
So it was actually part of what we call Hart County now was Wilkes County, part of Madison County. So a lot of you had two big counties, and that's a whole story there too.
Okay.
Franklin County was huge. It went all the way from North Carolina all the way to Athens, and then Wilkes County was a huge county as well out to the side. So the area where he moved to was called Wilkes County.
Okay.
But it was actually what we would call now Hart County. So if you go to Gold Mine Church of God, and you go to the road right in front of there is Henry's Church. That area over there at one time was Wilkes County.
Okay.
So he lived over in that area. So he went to fight the Revolutionary War, not the Civil War, but the Revolutionary War.
Wow, you're in the 1700s
Yes,
now.
1700s.
Okay.
So he was fighting the Revolutionary War, and he was given a furlough. His wife was pregnant.
Okay.
So she had to, he was wanting to come back home and visit her and see, he knew it was about time for her to have a baby. So when he got back home, evidently some Tories, which what a Tory is basically a British soldier, the people we were fighting against. So they evidently kind of followed him or saw where he was going. But the very day he got home, the first day he saw his son, the Tories went in his house and got him and took him out and hung him and killed him.
That's terrible.
So he's buried there at Henry's Church Cemetery, which is right in front of Gold Mine Church of God. You go down that road there. It's about a mile down the road on the right out in the woods on the right. Before you get to the creek, you'll see it. It's kind of off, so you'll drive right by it. But he's buried right there.
Next to his dad?
Yes.
Okay.
No, next to his son.
Next to his son.
Okay, so what happened was his wife had the son, you know, and he saw it, and so he died. So William grew up, which his son, and he had a son, and he named him Job after
his dad.
After his dad.
Wow.
Then Job actually happened to be the person that the lawsuit we were talking about, Job Bowers, who over at the center of the world.
Yeah.
That was the Job that actually was the Esquire.
Oh, wow. Okay,
so
I knew that name came back around.
So
okay.
he was an Esquire.
And that's the younger Job.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then Job had a son, and he was named William.
Okay.
So you had...
Makes the family history.
Yes,
Job,
yeah.
William, Job, William.
So you had Job, William, Job, William. Okay. So the last William, well, the second Job there.
Second William.
He was the guy who laid out all the streets of Cannon, Georgia. So he was big in Cannon, and basically him and the guy named J.J. Manley laid out all the streets in the town of Cannon.
Okay.
His son.
When I think of Cannon, I think of like one street with one side street.
No, there's
more
a
than
bunch of
that.
there's more
Okay,
streets.
okay. And is Cannon named after a cannonball?
It was originally named West Bowersville.
Oh, okay.
It was West Bowersville.
West Bowersville.
Yeah. So
Now,
Joe Bowers.
where did the Bowersville come from?
Okay, so later on, his son William. So he had Job, William, William Franklin Bowers was the man who owned the land where Bowersville is, and so he divided up him and his family, divided up all the lots and drew it all out and said, okay, I'll sell lots. And originally, most of the deeds to the property was no alcoholic beverages can be sold, bought, or there's all kinds of. So it's like if you do, then the land reverts back to the Bowers family. So we give you nothing for the improvements. The land comes back to us. So that was written in all the most of the original deeds.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was William Bowers. He was the founder of Bowersville.
Okay.
He was a very prominent person in the state. He built something called the Carnesville Railway. There's a railway that went from Cannon to Carnesville, Tom Peters Road, and he built that by himself.
Wow.
He was very instrumental in the railway between Bowersville and Hartwell as well. So there's a lot of history right there. It's way too much to cover right now.
Yeah.
But William Franklin Bowers. So there's Job, William, Job, William.
Those Bowers were industrious, weren't they?
Yes.
That is cool. Well, anything to wrap up in this? If you're interested in history, and you're on Facebook, take a look at Bits of History. It's Aubrey's page that he posts, and he posts quite every couple of days. I see something new, and then a lot of times you'll go back and comment to another post that brings it back up again with more pictures, more information, and it's just really interesting. It makes for a lot of fun reading and some great pictures that you put on there. And you've brought some great pictures today, and thank you for being with us. This has been so cool. So I hope, that you'll continue your interest in history, and
at least for a while.
until you start looking at microbiology under a chemistry set or something like that with one of your other hobbies. What hobbies do you think you might have that you haven't had time to pursue?
I've not too many more. I'm not going to take on too many more right now.
You got a full plate with all the ones that you mentioned.
I don't do all of them all the time. I've just done some of them at different times, and then some of them I go back to.
Anything on the bucket list that you just have to check off in the next few years? Travel or?
Maybe a little travel. Me and my wife are both retired now, so I think we are going to visit a few historical places. We do a lot of that now, though. We like a lot of the places we read about, we got to go see them.
Yeah.
So it's like it makes them a whole lot better.
Yeah. What kind of places have you seen or are you going to see?
We've visited, we've done her genealogy for her family, so we've went as far as North Carolina, all over hunting graves. That's one of the things we've done quite a bit. We've spent several months doing that. So we're almost to the end of that, though. So, but her family history, I guess, is what we've been concentrating on mostly.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's interesting. Any overseas trips?
No, not
too many things to see here, right?
Too many things to see here.
That's good. Well, Aubrey Sims, thank you so much for being here today. And
thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. And we've got at least 2 or 3 more shows with your other hobbies and more information. So thanks for watching today. This has been fun. Wes Bailey, thanks for your expertise, and thanks to HeartCom for letting us be here. And I hope you all have a great week, and join me again next week.
Thank you.